In the summer of 1988, 21-year-old Judy Ellen Chamberlain was living in Boston, Massachusetts. On July 28, 1988, her body was discovered by a maintenance worker in the basement of a building at 451 D Street in Boston's South Boston neighborhood, an area that is now part of the city's Seaport district. Investigators determined that her death was a homicide. At the time, the case entered the history of Boston police investigations as an unresolved killing that would remain open for more than 3 decades. Chamberlain's body was found in a basement sump area of the Fargo building. Police at the scene noted that she had been strangled. Biological evidence collected from her body indicated that she had also been sexually assaulted prior to her death. The combination of strangulation and physical signs of assault led investigators to classify the incident as a violent sexual homicide. Despite immediate investigative efforts in 1988, police did not identify a suspect and the case went cold. In the initial investigation, law enforcement officers and forensic specialists gathered evidence from the scene. Samples of biological material were collected from Judy Chamberlain's body, and those samples were preserved as part of the evidence from the case. As part of standard procedure in homicide investigations, police submitted biological evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Combined DNA Indexing System, known as CODIS, to compare DNA profiles from the unidentified perpetrator with profiles of known offenders. However, at that time, there was no match. Judy Chamberlain's murder remained unsolved for years, and the case faded in public attention as other investigations took priority. The investigation was periodically reviewed by homicide detectives, but the resources and forensic tools available in the late 1980s and early 1990s were limited compared with later advancements in DNA technology. Without a suspect or sufficient evidence to identify one, the case remained open but stagnant. In 1990, Richard Vega, a man who would later become central to the Chamberlain case, was convicted in a separate crime. He was convicted on 3 counts of rape in connection with an attack on a 72-year-old woman in Revere, Massachusetts, which occurred in 1987. For that crime, Vega was sentenced to a prison term of 19.5 to 20 years. As a result of this conviction, Vega was required under law to submit a DNA sample for inclusion in the state and federal DNA databases. After Vega's parole date approached, prosecutors petitioned to have him civilly committed under Massachusetts's Sexually Dangerous Person statute. This law allows the state to continue to confine individuals deemed sexually dangerous beyond the completion of their prison sentences. In 2008, a jury found Vega to be sexually dangerous under the statute, and he remained committed. In 2011, investigators working on Judy Chamberlain's cold case received a significant breakthrough. The DNA profile associated with the suspect in Chamberlain's murder, derived from DNA evidence collected in 1988, produced a match in the FBI's CODIS database to Richard Vega. This match occurred because Vega's DNA had been entered into the system following his 1990 conviction for the separate rape case. The CODIS hit identified Vega as a potential suspect in Chamberlain's killing. Despite the DNA match in 2011, Suffolk County prosecutors at that time declined to charge Vega with Judy Chamberlain's murder. Prosecutors said they did not believe they had sufficient additional evidence to meet the legal burden required to secure a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. At that point, the case remained unsolved, even with the identification of a suspect based on DNA. In the 1990 initial investigation, law enforcement officers and forensic specialists gathered evidence from the scene. Samples of biological material were collected from Judy Chamberlain's body, and those samples were preserved as part of the evidence from the case. As part of standard procedure in homicide investigations, police submitted biological evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Combined DNA Indexing System, known as CODIS, to compare DNA profiles from the unidentified perpetrator with profiles of known offenders. However, at that time, there was no match. Judy Chamberlain's murder remained unsolved for years, and the case faded in public attention as other investigations took priority. The investigation was periodically reviewed by homicide detectives, but the resources and forensic tools available in the late 1980s and early 1990s were limited compared with later advancements in DNA technology. Without a suspect or sufficient evidence to identify one, the case remained open but stagnant. In 1990, Richard Vega, a man who would later become central to the Chamberlain case, was convicted in a separate crime. He was convicted on 3 counts of rape in connection with an attack on a 72-year-old woman in Revere, Massachusetts, which occurred in 1987. For that crime, Vega was sentenced to a prison term of 19.5 to 20 years. As a result of this conviction, Vega was required under law to submit a DNA sample for inclusion in the state and federal DNA databases. After Vega's parole date approached, prosecutors petitioned to have him civilly committed under Massachusetts's Sexually Dangerous Person statute. This law allows the state to continue to confine individuals deemed sexually dangerous beyond the completion of their prison sentences. In 2008, a jury found Vega to be sexually dangerous under the statute, and he remained committed. In 2011, investigators working on Judy Chamberlain's cold case received a significant breakthrough. The DNA profile associated with the suspect in Chamberlain's murder, derived from DNA evidence collected in 1988, produced a match in the FBI's CODIS database to Richard Vega. This match occurred because Vega's DNA had been entered into the system following his 1990 conviction for the separate rape case. The CODIS hit identified Vega as a potential suspect in Chamberlain's killing. Despite the DNA match in 2011, Suffolk County prosecutors at that time declined to charge Vega with Judy Chamberlain's murder. Prosecutors said they did not believe they had sufficient additional evidence to meet the legal burden required to secure a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. At that point, the case remained unsolved, even with the identification of a suspect based on DNA. In 1999, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office launched an initiative called the Project for Unsolved Suffolk Homicides, also referred to as PUSH. Under this program, prosecutors and homicide detectives renewed efforts to examine and solve cold case murders, including the 1988 death of Judy Chamberlain. The initiative involved re-examining evidence, seeking new testimony, and applying modern investigative techniques that were not previously available. As part of the renewed investigation into Chamberlain's case, prosecutors and detectives worked to gather additional evidence beyond the DNA match. Investigators located witness testimony and other material that could support a prosecutable case against Vega. This re-examination of the evidence made it possible for prosecutors to present the case to a grand jury. On August 30, 2021, a Suffolk County grand jury returned an indictment charging Richard Vega with the murder of Judy Chamberlain. The indictment marked a major development in the cold case, coming 33 years after her death. Prosecutors filed the murder charge based on the combination of DNA evidence and new investigative material that had been collected as part of the PUSH initiative. Following the indictment, Vega was arraigned in Suffolk Superior Court in October 2021. At the arraignment, Vega entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge. The court ordered that he be held without bail based on the serious nature of the charge and the evidence presented. At that time, Vega remained committed under the Sexually Dangerous Person statute and in state custody. In the years that followed, the case continued through the court system. Investigators and prosecutors prepared for trial, presenting the evidence to support the charges against Vega. Because the prosecution was built on re-examined evidence and witness testimony in addition to the DNA match, the case represented a decades-long effort to bring legal accountability for Judy Chamberlain's death. In June 2024, a significant verdict was reached in the case. A jury found Richard Vega guilty of first-degree murder in connection with Judy Chamberlain's killing. The conviction occurred 36 years after her body was found in the basement of the Fargo building. The court heard testimony and evidence showing that Vega had sexually assaulted and strangled Chamberlain, and the jury's decision affirmed the prosecution's case. Following the guilty verdict, the court sentenced Vega to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life without parole means that Vega will remain imprisoned for the rest of his life with no opportunity for release. The sentence reflected the severity of the crime and the weight of evidence supporting the conviction. In statements after the verdict, Chamberlain's family expressed that the conviction brought them a sense of closure after decades without answers. Her siblings, standing in court during the proceedings, described the long period of uncertainty and loss experienced by the family since 1988. They noted that the resolution of the case allowed them to honor Judy's memory and find justice through the legal process. The investigation into Judy Chamberlain's murder illustrates the evolution of forensic science, criminal databases, and prosecutorial strategies over the past 3 decades. At the time of her death in 1988, DNA and forensic capabilities were limited compared to those available in the early 21st century. The preservation of biological evidence and developments in DNA profiling eventually enabled investigators to make definitive connections between crime scene evidence and a suspect. The role of the CODIS system was critical in linking Richard Vega to Chamberlain's case. The initial match in 2011 laid the groundwork for renewed investigation, even though the prosecution waited years to bring charges. The later collection of additional evidence and testimony provided a broader basis for the indictment and conviction. On January 13, 1987, the body of 43-year-old Raymond Frederick Keem was discovered in Allison Park, located in the Randwick area of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. A member of the public found Keem lying face up in the grass at the northern end of the park early that morning. Police were notified and responded to the scene. Keem's body was examined by forensic specialists. A post-mortem examination determined that he had suffered severe head injuries and that those injuries had caused his death. A coronial inquest held the following year, in 1988, confirmed that Keem died after being struck in the head by an unknown person or persons. For decades, no one had been charged with his killing, and his death remained an unsolved case. Raymond Keem was known to his family and friends as a martial arts expert. At the time of his death, he was 43 years old. Reports indicate that he had been married previously and had children. His death had a significant impact on his family, who were left without clarity about the circumstances for many years. In the months after his body was found, police and family members sought public assistance in identifying whoever was responsible for the violent assault that led to his death. Allison Park, where Keem's body was found, had a reputation in the 1980s as a location where gay men sometimes met socially. Reports from later investigations noted that police believed the murder might have been motivated by hatred or prejudice against gay men. Investigators considered the possibility that the attack was part of a broader pattern of biased violence in Sydney during the 1970s through the 1990s. That period included numerous violent crimes in public spaces against men who were believed to be gay. However, there was no concrete evidence that Keem himself identified as gay. His family and close contacts stated that he identified as heterosexual and had been in a de facto relationship at the time of his death. Following the initial investigation and the coronial inquest, the case was classified as a cold case for many years. In 2019, the New South Wales Police Force initiated a formal review of the case as part of a broader effort to re-examine unsolved homicides from that era. Detectives assigned to the review operated under Strike Force Argonaut, a specialized unit created to investigate deaths for potential bias motivations, including those with possible links to violence against lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer people between 1976 and 2000. During this period, at least 88 deaths of men had been examined for potential hate crime elements. Keem's death was among the cases reviewed under this initiative. In June 2021, police announced a reward of up to $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to the resolution of the case. The reward was intended to encourage people with knowledge of the events surrounding Keem's death or information about those responsible to come forward. Police publicly emphasized that the reward did not require a conviction, but was aimed at generating leads that could assist the ongoing investigation. Despite the reward, information sufficient to immediately charge a suspect did not materialize at that time. In August 2021, investigators made a breakthrough in the long unsolved case. Australian authorities arrested a then 75-year-old man identified as Stanley Bruce Early, also known historically by the alias Stanley Spider Sutton. Early was arrested at his home in the Melbourne suburb of Clayton in the state of Victoria on an outstanding warrant for the murder of Keem. Upon arrest, he was extradited to New South Wales to face charges. Police confirmed that Early would be held in custody while the case proceeded through the legal system. The murder charge against Early stemmed from evidence gathered through the renewed investigation and re-examination of the circumstances of Keem's death. Early was alleged to have been part of a group of individuals who frequented Allison Park at night and were inclined to assault men they believed were gay. Police described this group as engaging in violent conduct in the park, including setting upon men. The prosecution presented this context as part of its case against Early, citing witness testimony and historical accounts. Early's first court appearances included hearings where he was granted bail while awaiting trial. During those early proceedings, the prosecution presented an outline of its case against him, including references to historical incidents and behaviors linking him to violent activity in the park. Court records from that period reflect that the prosecution's case was primarily circumstantial, with challenges in tying specific actions by Early to the fatal injuries suffered by Keem. The trial of Stanley Bruce Early continued over an extended period. In June 2023, the Supreme Court of New South Wales reached a verdict. The jury found Early guilty of the murder of Raymond Keem, concluding that he was part of the attack that led to his death. In delivering the verdict, the courts noted that despite the case being built on circumstantial evidence, without direct eyewitness testimony of contact between Early and Keem, the totality of proof presented met the standard required for conviction. The court also heard evidence about the nature of the attack on Keem. The forensic evidence showed that he had sustained severe injuries to his head and body, consistent with being kicked and stomped while lying on the ground. Those injuries were sufficient to cause death. Keem's body also showed significant trauma to the face and mouth. Medical testimony during the trial detailed the extent of the physical injuries and how they would have been inflicted by forceful manual assault. At sentencing, Justice Dina Yahia addressed the nature of Early's actions and their impact on Keem's family and community. Early was sentenced to a maximum term of 22 years in prison, with a mandatory non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. The judge noted that although it could not be proven beyond reasonable doubt that Early delivered the fatal blow, she was satisfied that he had participated in the violent conduct that resulted in Keem's death and had intended to cause grievous bodily injury. Justice Yahia also described the motivation behind the attack as influenced by prejudice, characterizing it as an affront to civilized society. During sentencing, the court acknowledged the long span of time between the murder in 1987 and the resolution of the case more than 33 years later. The judge noted that no sentence could fully compensate for the decades of suffering experienced by Keem's family and those close to him. Statements from the victim's relatives described the profound loss they had endured since his death. Information presented at trial included testimony from individuals who had known Early or had associations with him in the years surrounding the events at Allison Park. Some accounts described Early's history of violent attitudes towards gay men and his involvement in prior incidents of aggression. The prosecution also introduced statements about his behavior and reputation at the time of the alleged offense, including allegations that he expressed or acted on anti-gay sentiments. The resolution of Raymond Keem's cold case through conviction, sentencing, and public acknowledgement of the crime represents one of several high-profile outcomes in Australia involving historical violence against individuals at locations known as gay beats. These investigations, spanning decades, reflect broader efforts by law enforcement to address unresolved deaths from past decades and to apply contemporary investigative and legal standards to historical cases. The conviction of Stanley Bruce Early closed a chapter in the long unsolved murder of Raymond Keem, bringing legal closure after 36 years.
justice authorities in New South Wales have reaffirmed their commitment to pursuing justice in cold cases, particularly those involving hate crimes or bias-motivated violence. The case underscores the complex interplay of societal attitudes, historical context, and legal accountability in addressing long-standing unresolved murders.